Hi everyone, I'm very happy to be with you today. My name is Celia Hodent. I have a PhD in psychology and I've been working in the video games industry for the past 15 years. I started my career at Ubisoft in France, I'm French. Then I moved to Ubisoft Montreal where I worked a lot with the playtest lab. I then moved on to LucasArts in San Francisco where I worked on some Star Wars games, and then I moved on to Epic Games in North Carolina, where I became the director of user experience at the studio level. So I worked on a lot of different projects. I worked on Unreal Engine 4 and on multiple games like Fortnite. I actually worked very closely with the Fortnite team up until October 2017, where I became an independent consultant. So now I work in freelance. I work with a lot of different studios, different sizes, from indie developers to AAA studios all across the world, and I help them with their UX strategy. So we're going to talk about UX today, and more specifically, we're going to talk about user research and why it's so important. So first of all, a quick definition of user experience. It's all about considering the humans who are going to use a product, whether it is a park, a tool, or a video game, and to put ourselves into their shoes so that we can anticipate their needs, their perception, their enjoyment of the product, etc. So if you think about a park, if we design a park without thinking about the end users, then we might end up with something that is not really usable for everyone, or is not really enjoyable, because even though it's probably cheaper to make straight lines in parks, it's not convenient if we need to cross the park to go faster, to be at the crosswalk, which is what most of us is going to do. And so if we don't think about UX early enough, what's going to happen is that people are not really happy with the product. They don't use it in the way it was designed. And if we try to fix things too late, this is when we try to patch, and it's usually not working well. If we don't think about the user experience very early on in a project, we are going to end up losing money in the end, because we're going to have to fix things when it's too late and it's not satisfying and it's much more expensive. That's why having a UX mindset is very important. It's about considering the human factors when we design tools, products, or video games. And this is really important to think about it very early on in the process. Now, what is an experience? An experience is what happens in our minds as we are enjoying something, whatever it is. Now this presentation, or a video game, or a tool as we use it. And so that's the reason why it's really important to understand a little bit how the brain works, how the mind works, before we can tackle research and how to conduct that. So this is a very simplified diagram of what's going on in the brain as we process information, such as right now you're processing my talk. It always starts with stimulus, so perception of stimuli from the environment. Then we're going to process that information, and if we learn about something new, what's going to happen, it's going to change something physically in our memory. We have billions of neurons, and each of these neurons is connected up to 10,000 of other neurons. That makes a lot of connections, and these connections are called synapses. The brain has brain plasticity, which means that the brain is constantly changing depending on how we interact with the environment and what's going on in our lives. So when you play a video game, like doing anything, this is going to change the architecture of your brain. From the perception of a stimulus to a change in memory, there are a lot of things happening, of course, and there are a lot of factors that are going to influence the quality of the processing. We have biological factors, we have physiological factors. We're going to just here look at attentional resources, because we know that the more we pay attention to something, the better we're going to process that information, and therefore the better we're going to retain it. So again, this is very simplified. The brain does not have independent compartments like these that are working alone from each other. Everything is interacting, and it's very, very complex. But here we're just going to take an example for each of these mental processes of what are the main limitations for our brain, so that we can anticipate what problems can emerge when we make a video game, and how we can test to find out these problems and then fix them. So let's start with perception. Take a look at this image and think about what you're perceiving here. Depending on who you are, you're not going to perceive the same thing here. Maybe you're just seeing strips of colors, or Lego blocks, or Minecraft characters. Or maybe you are perceiving Street Fighter characters, like it's the case here. This is showing that perception is subjective. Depending on your prior knowledge, depending on your emotional connection with this game, you're not perceiving this image in the same way. And depending on your biology, you're not perceiving this image in the same way. If you're colorblind, for example, like it's the case for about 8% of the male population, you probably feel excluded from this example, and I apologize for that. It's a great reminder for everyone to never ever use colors only to convey information. You can use colors, but use other things like texture or shapes. So perception is subjective. That's the main limitation. We do not perceive the reality as it is. Perception is a construction of the mind. So what does it mean concretely for us as we make games? You're gonna have to create a bunch of assets that are audio and visual for most of them. And what we want to make sure is that what you're trying to convey in the game is what people perceive in the end. But because perception is subjective, we cannot be guaranteed that this is what's going to happen. So we test. Here's an example with Fortnite. Very early on, we tested a prototype of Fortnite where people could explore and harvest material and craft and build and combat. And they explored the user interface as well. And then we asked them some questions, like with this icon. We asked them, what is this? What do you perceive here? For this particular icon that is supposed to represent the traps in Fortnite, a lot of players actually did not perceive that, even though they interacted with the crafting menu. Some perceived that this was ammunition, others a crown, or others trees or something related to building. So here we have a problem. We have an icon that is supposed to convey a very precise information that is not perceived in the way intended by a bunch of players. So instead of trying to change the players, we changed the design. And this is how we changed the design for an archetype of a trap, like a stereotype. There are no bear traps in Fortnite, but as soon as we changed it, we didn't have any more confusion with this icon. And this is what's going to be very important. Of course, sometimes you want to play around with perception, and that's okay. But for many things like environment design, character design, and user interface, you might want to convey very precise information to players so that they can learn about the game without having to go through tutorials or without them being confused. And so to make sure that this happens, you need to test all the important information that you're conveying to make sure that what people perceive is what you intended. Now let's play another game. Try to visualize in your mind the sculptor, the thinker, le penseur, from Auguste Rodin, the sculptor with the guy thinking really deeply. Can you remember exactly its posture? Like on which leg or legs lay which arm or arms of the thinker? Think about it for a few seconds. A lot of people try to reenact the posture to try to remember it. A lot of people believe he has the right arm on the right leg or vice versa. Or a lot of people tell me it's on the same side, right arm on the right leg. Well, actually, most people are wrong. He has both arms on the left leg. It's really hard to remember that accurately, and that's because memory is fallible. Perception is a construction of the mind, and memory is a reconstruction. And every time we reconstruct a memory, it might not be precise. And on top of that, we forget a bunch of things, like it's shown here with the forgetting curve. So what does that mean for us? We cannot really rely on players' memory for a bunch of things. And we should not rely on our memory during production either. But to go back to the players, there are a lot of things that players are going to have to memorize in a game. So what we want to do, especially for the heads-up display, we want to make sure that we're going to give away information at all times to players so that they don't have to remember this information. For example, what weapons they have equipped, or what are their abilities. Or here, every time a player gets close to a searchable object, we don't ask them to remember what key to press. We have a pop-up telling players what they have to do. Same thing if they want to craft stuff in Fortnite. It's a game where we don't want to challenge players into remembering the recipe for the stuff that they can craft. So we allow them to pin the recipe onto their HUD so that they can have this information at all time. They don't have to remember that. They don't have to remember what ingredients they need, how many of each, and what they're missing. They can just focus on what's really important for them, and here is to find copper ore. That's why it's very important to define very early on where you want to challenge your players and where you don't want to challenge them. Like here in Fortnite, we don't want to challenge them into memorizing the recipes. So we're going to have to think about ways to reduce the memory load for this type of information in our game. Another thing I wanted to show you is here, I would like you to pick a card and try to remember that card as accurately as you can. Now, I bet I can guess which card you picked and make it disappear. Ta-da! Did that work? If it did and you wonder why, it's just because I changed all the cards. So whatever card you picked, it's not there anymore. This is what magicians do. They misdirect our attention, and this is how their magic work. We should understand also how this works for video games. This phenomenon is very well known in psychology and is called change blindness, although it's better to say change unawareness because it's more precise. What does that mean is that attention resources are very scarce. We can't multitask. We can't pay attention to too many things at the same time. This is not how our attention works. The way it works is we are focusing on one or two elements, and then we are filtering out the rest. We always believe that we can multitask, and it's a fallacy. It can work in certain situations, but most of the time we can't multitask. So we have to be careful with that in our games. Now, a lot of games are challenging players' attention. What you want to make sure of is that you're not over-challenging players' attention, and also that you're not challenging them when they are currently learning about your game. So, for example, during the onboarding part, or when you convey important information about how to play the game. This is an example of a playtest session in Fortnite where we teach players how to heal. So this is the first time that the player is getting a lot of damage. Their health bar is going below 50%, and so the health bar is flashing, and you have an information in the center saying you've been hurt, consume a health item to get better. And this is the tutorial for health regen. The problem is that most players did not even see the stuff blinking in their screens because they were too busy fighting zombies. This is what I mean by attention is scarce. We can't multitask. So be very careful when you craft your game not to draw attention to too many things at the same time, especially as your players are learning about your game. So remember that perception is subjective, attention resources are scarce, and memory is fallible. It's very important to understand those limitations of our brains, important for us as we make our games, but also important for our players so that we can anticipate confusion that can happen, and also that we can prepare ourselves to test the game so that we can identify problems early on and fix them before we ship. Based on these main limitations, we can then define a framework that can guide us as we develop our games. This is the framework that I've been using in the game industry. It's just my way of putting that together, and it's divided into two main categories: usability and engageability. Usability is the ability of the game to be used. It's more about, is it functional? Can people understand what they need to do? But it's not enough to make a good game. A usable game can be boring. So we also care about engageability, the ability of the game to be engaging. It's all about, are people motivated to play the game and to come back? Are they feeling some good emotions about the game? Are they in the flow? I don't have the time to go through all that, but let me just give you an example from the usability section, the signs and feedback. Signs and feedback are really important to polish in a game, and we can fairly easily test these in research. So here is an example of signs and feedback in environment design in the game Brawl Stars. Here, just by looking at the environment, you can already tell where you can go, where there is collision. For example, the blue blocks look very strong and solid. There's probably collision there. You cannot go through it, and you can probably be protected behind it if other players shoot at you. Probably not the case with the wooden crates, because in real life, it's not very sturdy. So yes, there's collision, but it's probably not a good idea to hide behind them because they're likely destructible. And then you have the tall grass. There's probably no collision there because in real life, you can walk through the grass. And in many games, you can hide in tall grass. That's already giving you an idea just by looking at the game about where you can go, what you need to do in this game. These elements are called signs. Signs are all the elements that are telling the players what they can do. The clearer they are, the better. It's going to be more intuitive for players to understand how to play the game without having to look into tutorials. And feedback are all the signs that are giving information back after the player is doing something. So for example, here, it's the feedback when the player is about to shoot, and it's showing a previs of what's going to happen. And this is also giving a lot of information to players about their main guns. Like, for example, if it's going far and it's narrow, this is probably like a rifle. If it's short and wide, it's probably more like a shotgun. And the one on the bottom right looks more like a bomb. When you polish signs and feedback, it's making it much, much easier for players to understand how to play your game. And these you can easily test. You can just show players your game or even just artwork or prototypes and ask them, what do you think you can do? What do you think is the goal in this game? What do you think this weapon does? This is already going to help you really refine those signs and feedback in your game. And like I said, we also care about engageability. I don't have to get into this, but motivation is one of the main things that we care about. It's all about meaningful goals and rewards. We also care about intrinsic motivation, competence, autonomy, relatedness, and again, emotion and game flow. This is fairly complex, yet there are ways to test for these. I'm not going to have the time to get into this, but this is a very helpful guide to help us find problems early on and fix them. Now, to find problems, there's another limitation that we need to be mindful of, is the curse of knowledge. You as a game developer, you know your game too well. Therefore, you're not the best person to try to understand what could be confusing in your game. And that's the main reason we are doing user research using the scientific method so that we can try to figure out what's going on with our game without biasing ourselves with our opinions. And oh my, we have tons of biases. So the idea is to control for those biases so that we can find out what is going on. So here's an example of a playtest lab. That's the one that I built at Epic Games. So let's take an example in Fortnite and how we found out where a problem was coming from and how to fix it. During the development of Fortnite, we spent a lot of time testing the game. We were in online tests for about 2 years, where players were joining in and going through the tutorial and playing the game, and we're sending surveys, and we were also doing playtest sessions at Epic, and we're gathering all this data, and we're trying to find out what are the strengths of the game and also its weaknesses. One of the problems that we found out early on is that at some point, players were starting to say that they felt the game was grindy. So when they were leveling up, at some point they felt that they had to harvest too much stuff in order to craft weapons that were useful for their level. Also, remember, we started Fortnite with Save the World, which is the RPG mode of the game. And so why is this happening? Is this because the system design of harvesting is not fine-tuned? So of course we can take a look at the game design, but what's going to be very important is to look at perception of that design. Remember, perception is subjective, and sometimes it might be that there's something else that is making players perceive the game in a certain way. We had a lot of hypotheses, and that's very important. You need to have an hypothesis of why this thing is going on. One of these hypotheses is maybe players do not understand this. This is the weak point in Fortnite. It's supposed to tell players where to aim in order to destroy an object faster. The problem is in early playtest sessions, this is what we were observing. players were not using the weak point system. Of course, if players do not understand what this does, they're gonna take way longer to harvest anything. At the beginning of the game, it might not be very important because they can craft very quickly, but once they reach a certain level, it's going to be very annoying because then it's going to literally take them forever to get enough material to craft anything. And so if they don't understand the weak point system, this might be impacting their perception that the game is too grindy. And after those tests, I was asking players, what is this? To see if they understood what that meant. And most of them replied to me, no idea. So in my opinion, it was probably change blindness. They were not really perceiving this because it's really blending with everything else. So we thought that maybe if we made it bigger, changing color so that it contrasts better with the background, pulsing inward, that would help players notice it. And this is what we did and retested. Doing that retest, problem, players are still not using it. It's so frustrating. And after that playtest, I was asking players, what is this? This time the answer was different. Most of them were telling me, oh, this is the element telling me that I'm targeting this object. Okay, so now they see it, they perceive it. The problem is that they don't understand what it means. And so this is when we have to stop trying to fix things in the UI. It's a fallacy most of the time. We have to rethink a lot of things so that we can convey that information better. And this is what the designers did. They removed the weak point system from the beginning of the game. As you start playing Fortnite Save the World, you don't have this. But then they added the weak point system in the skill tree. And players had to buy it very early on in the game. And now there's more fluff around it. You see a big text explaining what it does. People don't read, but we always think that people are going to read. But there's a lot of events around it, and you see a video showing what it does. And after we did that, we had way more people using the weak point system. And so that's the reason why it's really important when you have a problem with your game and players are not doing what you expected them to do, or not finding something fun, or are confused about something. Make hypotheses. Do not try to fix it too fast because you might miss something different that is actually causing the problem. And this is how we do research, with a UX mindset, with an understanding of the human brain, and with a scientific method so that we can control for our own biases and opinions that are tainting what's going on, and find out where those problems are coming from and fix them efficiently and very early on in the process. So as you can see, there are a lot of things that you can test, and you can test many things early on. You don't have to wait until you're in alpha or beta to test. Test as early as you can, but test with a purpose. Have hypotheses. Try to understand what you're trying to accomplish in the game, what information you're trying to convey to players, what are the things players should be excited about in your game, so that you can really think about how to test those hypotheses in the best way possible, when to test them. And as you do so, try to find out where the problems are coming from, and then how to fix them. And then once you fix them, you verify to make sure that the experience that you want to offer is indeed now what's happening for players. You cannot test everything early on, but there's always something that you can test. Even very early in conception, you can do benchmark or competitive reviews. You can also do a persona research for your players to understand a bit better what they care about and what they're going to need in the game. And as you are starting to work on the game, there are lots of different tests that you can do. Already in pre-production, you should be testing a lot of prototypes so that you can verify that your assumptions are true. You can make sure that players understand what you're trying to do. By testing in pre-production, it's going to allow you to spot a lot of things very early on that are going to be much more easily fixed than if you wait until you're in alpha to do so. You can paper test. You can test some system design with just paper and dice. There are a lot of things that you can do. I really encourage you to test as early as you can and regularly. I promise you, it's going to make you save time down the line. There are different expert roles in game UX. You have UX designers, who are the ones to make things functional for users based on user needs and product goals. You have UX researchers, who are the ones evaluating and testing the experience that people have using the scientific method. UX data analysts also do the same type of research as UX researchers. They just don't use the same type of data. And then you have UX strategists or director of UX, who are here to coordinate and advocate and ensure everybody is aligned and that we can focus on strategy. But at the end of the day, everybody is concerned with user experience. It's not just a role. It's not just a step in the process. UX is better seen as a mindset with 4 pillars. First of all, it's human-centered. We care about the humans who are going to use the product or play the game, and we want to put ourselves into their shoes. So we want to step away from our own perception so that we can make sure that players' perception and experience is the one we intend for them. It's grounded in science, not in opinions. Sure, you're going to have your opinions, and that's fine, but we treat opinions as hypotheses that we later test. It's a collaborative process. Everybody on the team should be concerned about UX, and it's not just a step in the process. It's a way to approach the whole process. And last but not least, it's benevolent. We are here to defend players' best interest. We care for the users, we fight for the users, and we want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. And that's it for me. Remember that the brain is very good at making sense of the world with very little information. This is how we survived the predators. But our world is much more complex today, and we might fall into traps. You're going to fall into traps. Your players are going to fall into traps. Our jobs here is to anticipate those problems and not wait until it's too late to face those problems and fix them. I hope that this was useful for you. Thanks so much for your attention. You can find a lot of information on my website, celiahodent.com. And there's also all what we talked about in my book, The Gamer's Brain. And I have also other books that you might want to check out. Thank you so much again for your attention, and I wish you the best. Bye.